Okay, what's up everybody? Welcome guys to another Big Mish movement workshop. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit more talking, a little bit maybe less demoing, because we're going to talk about warming up, which is more of a conceptual thing. There are infinite ways we can warm up, but there's more things that we want to, principles we want to pay attention to, things we want to sort of check off and do, do's and don'ts obviously, and just ways we can optimize our body and get the most out of our body. And actually sometimes when we warm up properly, we'll even be able to get ourselves out of pain, get ourselves out of these bad states that we're in. So then you're not only able to get the most out of your warm-up, or workout, but you've also done yourself a service. And then the workout further perpetuates these good patterns when you warm up properly. I am very particular about warming up. Warming up has been a bit of my forte, I feel, since being in this sort of strength and conditioning world, because that's kind of what we have to do, especially when I think that's kind of like with professional basketball anyway, it's what you have to be good at, because muscle development is even at the G League level, we don't have a lot of time with these guys, so it's workouts are usually for maintenance and whatnot, so your warm-ups are so important, your warm-ups are so key. And so it's become just something that I've been very fanatical about. I've been built some wonderful relationships with some guys who love my work, warm-ups. Shout out to Andre Ingram, you know, he and I have been working together like 4 years now, and he was one of my OG people to come to me and say, hey, let's get a warm-up routine before game days, until it became a mandatory thing for my team. But regardless of me working with athletes, I'm talking about warming up regardless of who you are. So, the funny thing is, it really does not change. It does not change at all. The stuff I'm gonna do with or what I would attempt to do with a retired, let's say 65 plus year old person, the same warm-up goals are what I would be doing with my athletes. There might be different varies of intensities, but the goals are the same, the principles are the same, and that's what I'm here to clear up with you guys today. Because when I look around and see people warming up, oh my god, I hate what I see a lot of the time. And because we don't necessarily know what we're doing. People don't tell us this stuff, and also some of the traditional ideas of warming up are so outdated. For example, the traditional, I will just get on the treadmill and put it on lowest speed and start walking slowly, right? Yes, okay, so yeah, I mean, in a theory it works, it does warm you up, but what you've just done is kickstart your entire muscle group. Every team player, every weak player, strong player, overly compensated player, you're just telling them to just work. Hey, it's like basically you just push the person into the deep end and told them to swim. And said that's your warm-up, right? Which, okay, it works, sure, but we want to be a little bit more systematic. We want to be a little bit more integrative, make sure we can reciprocate and alternate, because that's what we are as human beings. We are alternating human beings. We use one arm, one leg at a time in an alternating fashion, and that switches. We tend to be overly dominant to one side, and that causes our joints and different postural patterns of balances and whatnot to really shift as well. So even more important of why your warm-up techniques or principles, patterns, whatever you do, are very important to unwind some of these dominancies that we've built up, okay? Which is pretty much a biggest component of what I do. And also just another thing is, we'll talk about stretching. Yeah, stretching and releasing, which we are going to do, talk a little bit about doing. However, the idea of, well, I'm tight, so I'm going to want to get loose for my warm-up, so I'm just going to release everything on the foam roller, and then I'm going to stretch everything on the stretch mat, and then I'm going to, whatever, jump into my workout. It's important to understand that what we've done there is absolutely nothing to prepare our system. We've calmed stuff down, which has maybe been good for the muscles. Maybe they need it. Maybe that particular muscle needs it. But some of them might not need it. And at the end of the day, We're here to address biomechanic position, postural position, breathing, integration with core, and like I said, a little bit of this integration, reciprocation, alternation, so that your body can be to what it is, to what it needs to be, to how it should be. You're like, oh, okay, now I feel my hips working properly. Now I feel my left heel just as well as my right heel. You know, these kind of things that we just maybe not be subconscious of. And while you're running on the treadmill might build up a good sweat and get all the blood flowing, sure, that's warmed you up. You haven't addressed any postural positions, biomechanical weaknesses, core breathing, integration, and all that stuff. Or if you just released on the foam roller and then stretch with your stretch band, you haven't exactly what I've just said. You haven't done any of that either. As good as that might be to release certain muscles, we definitely need to turn certain muscles on. So no, I'm not against releasing stretching. It's just we tend to overdo it. We tend to live in that zone thinking that that's what we need all the time. And again, certain muscles need to be released and stretched, but there are plenty of other muscles that need to be activated, turned on, and even furthermore strengthened. Which is why your warm-up techniques are so important and imperative actually to fixing those patterns, you know, addressing those weaknesses, and more importantly, turning some of those weaknesses into strengths, which is what we're trying to do or achieve ultimately. For example, the cliche thing, or I don't want to say cliche because I say cliche because it's a lot more complicated, but if we want it to be as simple as possible, the biggest missing factor everybody has are weak hips, weak core, right? That's pretty much how you want to simplify it as much as possible, okay? So what we want to do basically is turn those into strengths. So number one is warm them up properly, get them activated, get a conscious feeling of your core integrated with breathing and postural patterns that we're talking about. Then get a good sense of feeling of your hips, reciprocating, alternating, that we'll talk about. Now that you have that activated on, consciously aware, and it feels good, we cycle through that and put that into your workout and then better those patterns and strengthen those patterns, add some loading to those patterns, which is just only going to make you more stronger, neurologically more confident. And that's what ultimately ingrains it into what it is, a better human being or a better adapted human being, learned behavior, learned patterns. We just don't execute good enough patterns in our exercises. We usually, you know, we get lost in the world of fitness and sometimes pick a lot of bad exercises. What we want to do sometimes is just hammer down on the things we need to do, and after that you can do whatever you want. But we just need to get some of these good patterns, some of these good movements, integration, reciprocation, and alternation. So with that being said, this is what you want to do for your warm-up. This is pretty much how it goes. This is pretty much yeah, you know, we can debate certain things we want to switch around, but I would say this is probably bang for your buck the best. Okay, I have my little notes here, sorry. So number one is breathing. Okay, and here's why. Because breathing is tied to relaxation. With relaxation is tied to body position and posture. So if you get your breathing right, you might actually hammer down and check a bunch of boxes you might not even need to do when it comes to the next part, which will be muscle releasing, okay? So now you could actually switch that around. You could do your foam rolling first, but the reason why I say do your breathing first is because we're all gonna be tight throughout a day. We've all carried some tension, poor breathing patterns, need some tension, blah, 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 blah. Use your workouts to reset yourself into the best state possible. And so that's the best thing you can do is start with a proper breathing technique, get some good airflow, all of that. And then some things will correct themselves, and then you might not even need to release as many muscles. You might not need to even feel like you need to stretch, because it's like, oh, I actually feel great. And that's the funny thing is, like, when you do some proper breathing, which affects the relaxation and the position, you'll be in a much better state to work out actually than dude who went on a treadmill and ran for 5 minutes and built up a sweat. Believe it or not. Sometimes less is more, old saying goes. So that's why I put breathing, and just obviously, you know, I've done the last workshop is right there, so you can check that out, whole workshop on breathing. It is also a cornerstone of what I do, so I do a lot of breathing in my exercises. So I'm not actually going to go into too much breathing stuff, just because you have the previous workshop. But if I did want to talk a little bit in terms of position, and these exercises, again, I'm just gonna briefly go over because I've covered them so much. Some of the other stuff I'll go over a little bit more detail, but there's like 3 exercises when talking about, okay, what is breathing, what is position? Well, first of all, breathing, you gotta get your breathing rate down, you gotta slow your breath rate down. And then position, I could talk about dropping the ribs and getting us out of this extended state. So, that I will show. Let's talk about that a little bit, okay? So, posturally, a lot of us will be very extended, overly extended, hips tilted forward, back superly arched. Why? Because this is your body's natural, easiest position to adopt. But it also signifies a little bit of stress related to just holding yourself up there, okay? Not enough balance of core even tension. If you're somebody that might not be overly extended, there might be some different compensations going on, but usually this is the easiest thing for our body to do. So we kind of want to get us out of this extended position. A lot of people blame the hips and the hip flexors and sitting and the stuff. Some of that will be a factor, yes, but you'll find that more often than not, when a movement gets difficult, or when we're getting up out of a chair, or even walking, running, our backs, everything will be in full lock extension. While that might be a natural thing for our spine to do, it is an overly extended state. We'll see a lot of back tension, we see a lot of disc degeneration, and your core is in its least optimal position to work. So when I say core, we're going to tie that in with breathing, which is another reason why you want to do breathing first, because you kind of activate your core right away. But basically, I've gone over some of these exercises before, so there's 3 that I'll just briefly talk about right now. And that is, we have, I've got the feet on the wall exercise. I've done that before. I even have a YouTube tutorial video of that one as well. But you've got your 90 degrees right here, feet on the wall, back flat, okay, back is off, no extension. We've got our core working, we've got slightly lifted of the hips, and that way when we exhale, we can work our core. So that is one example of an exercise. Another exercise, a good breathing core exercise, would be this forward rounded one. I also have this tutorial of this one as well. We're rounding up and just breathing into your upper back. Long exhales, allowing that core to really get tightened, getting us out of extension, okay? That's another example. And then I've also done another common one, would be this, what do I call this? The anti-extension hang, where I'm going to hold on to something, bend my knees, lift my belt buckle up, hanging onto something. I breathe into my back. Usually we're squeezing something between the knees, right there. And it's just kind of like a modified of what the previous one, but you've got a lot more hip engagement here and a lot more ability to stretch your back and breathe into your rib cage throughout, okay? So those are just sort of 3 breathing, positional awareness exercises that can kind of sort of sharpen up some or bring some neutrality to your posture, because we're going to bring some activation to your abs, funneling some good airflow throughout your ribs, because we're putting you into a stretch position, allowing your back to be off and relaxed, stretched, and then we're getting a little bit of leg involvement too, so that's just affecting your whole posture in a good, balanced way. So that's why I said breathing, relaxation into position. Some of that's not necessarily relaxed. It's just but there definitely are easier movements to do. There's no movements actually. You're just staying there and just breathing and making sure you can breathe deeply. And the more you can exhale deeply, the more you'll feel those abs and everything working. So I would just do those first, because after you do that, you might not need to stretch, release that much. So that's enough about breathing, because we have plenty of references. I can link that in the captions for you, but there's plenty of references we can go to for breathing. Let's move on. What would I release now if I've done my breathing and actually feel great? So muscle release should really come down to the goal of muscle release now. It should come down to sort of two things, or something that that kind of interlinked. Pathology to alignment. So pathology is basically stuff going on, scar tissue, a previous injury, lots of trigger point knots from overuse, overtraining, whatever it is. Okay, when we have just got a lot of stuff going on, and I'm pointing to my quads because usually we actually have a lot of built up stuff going on in our quads because they tend to be overuse. That's something I would release maybe habitually until you feel like you might not need to. Calves are another good one. Lower back might be another one. But if you're somebody that's like, I need to release everything, my hamstrings and all of that, again, we need to turn on certain things. We don't need to turn on, we don't need to release everything, because not everything is going to need to be released. Some things are going to need that activation stimulation. And so what I was saying, some of these muscles, when it's overly tight, and then previously when I was standing up, is going to affect your posture. So that's again quads, and how they pull the pelvis down. We're going to get a lot of overuse. If we have an anteriorly tilted pelvis, like that, shows we got a lot of quads helping pull this pelvis down. Okay, so those people who have this sort of pattern going on, you actually, even though you might feel tight hamstrings, the way your hips are positioned, those hamstrings are being put under a lot of stress. So that might be an example of somebody that I wouldn't necessarily think you should be rolling out your hamstrings as well if you've fallen into this extreme of a pattern. Now everybody's different. We don't know what you have going on, but my general advice is, yeah, maybe you do a quick little posture assessment or just check out what you have going on. You know, feel free to message me on what should I release, but generally we don't necessarily want to release everything. But getting a little bit here of the quads, getting a little bit of the calves, just maybe some areas that have chronically worked, you know, that you had some injuries or whatever. Like I said, some of the lower back, maybe a little bit here in the chest because that's pulling us forward. But then you have to think, if this is being pulled forward and you're feeling tight at the back, you don't want to go everywhere. Just keep it limited. You know, you have to find out what you need and find out more so by doing this, you eliminate so much. So, as in by doing the proper breathing in the next part. So, enough about muscle release, because I'm going to actually do a video on the actual points. I'm going to do a video on foam rolling. I'm going to do a video on ball rolling. Those are the next two coming up. So actually, again, I'm not going to talk more about muscle release. That's just to give you an idea. I just like to be a little bit more conservative because I think we just tend to overdo it. And our nervous system just sends all the wrong signals of pain. And that's when we tend to just, well, I'm just going to release it thinking like it's going to get better. And usually it's just not getting better at all because your nervous system is just signaling for help. And you're just actually you might even be ruining some of the help by releasing it constantly. So that's one thing I want you guys to pay attention to, and even more reason to get through these next parts to make sure your body is properly integrated, reciprocated, alternated, and then you'll, trust me, so many of these tension patterns will just go away, because that's the magicness of the human body is movement. So enough about muscle release, we'll talk about that next week. So number 3 of what you want to do, now here comes the important part, the activation part, what we want to turn on. We'll start with hips, because we already did a bit of the upper body part, and like I said, if you learned about my breathing patterns, we talked about dropping those ribs. So we kind of, let's say we got a little bit of that pattern down. Now we're going to talk about the hips and activating the hips, but most importantly, what we need balance and movement. So we're not just talking about activating them together, but we need activation on one side, activation on the other side, and a little bit of movement from one side to the other side. So a hip shift basically is what I'm talking about. I didn't want to necessarily say hip shift, but basically if you've properly activated your hips, they will be shifting. It's just we want to actually get into the idea of a hip shift activation more so than just hip activation. Here's why, because again, we'll be very much stuck and shifted to one side. So the whole goal is to remind our body and get us to shift over to the other side. And this is why I talk so much about reciprocation, alternation, because it's just pretty much the long-term goal, ideology, mentality of what you should have in your warm-ups or workouts. So I'm gonna talk about 3 different things that you can do real quickly. I've done these exercises before, and I believe I might even have these all up on my YouTube somewhere, so not necessarily gonna go over them in detail. But for example, some things that we can do for hip shifting. Maybe it's a stretch. Well, I've done this stretch before, and that's the 90-90 degree stretch, okay? Whether you do a chest down or just keeping it up here, you're swiveling to one side, now you shift it to the other way, you can go chest down for a stretch, or even if you're just holding it, and just by going back and forth, as you can see, my hips are having to shift, and I'm doing a lot of nice reciprocating, alternating movements with my legs, okay? I've done this one before, and I already have the tutorials up, so that's why I like this one. That's why I value it so much. When we're just stuck to one side, if we only stretch and just do, let's just say, just a passive stretch only, and no movement, no activation, you haven't really sorted that hip shift out. And this is a very nice little movement where you can regressively, easily, actively do that hip shift, okay? All right. So then that's one. Now let's kick it up a notch, because like I said, that was a little regressive. Let's say you want to take this up to your feet, all right? So this is another common one that I've done. The sort of a half lunge position, glute loading exercise. I'll come this way. Keeping both your feet flat, and just going for that nice reach and allowing your hips to really shift into this leg. Your hips should also shift out to the side so you get a nice little stretch. And the more you reach and rotate into this leg, the more you'll feel that stretch. And so just by doing this, pulsating forward, you're getting a nice hip shift in a functional setting, because you actually put all your weight over this leg. So you've got some adductor, inner thigh, some hamstrings working. So that's all good stuff with the hip stretch. Just in case maybe we have some nice, we have a tightness going on. And also if you are shifted to one side is obviously going to be tighter than the other. Okay, so I do this 5 times, and now we're going to switch to the other side, because now we're getting that reciprocating, alternating pattern. So keeping your feet flat, just reaching forward, shifting your hips to the side, bending slightly, coming back. Okay, Watch my hips turn over this thigh. Come back. I got my inner thigh working, I got my hamstring working, I got a nice little hip shift. Good. Okay, so this is maybe a little bit more of a complicated stretch, but it's just a good one that I like to do just to get this reciprocating, alternating hip shift. Okay, so I'm done with that. Now what about a little bit of concentric activity? So not explosive, but more so pushful activity, because that was a little bit more stretching. We're gonna go in this same position, but be on the toe of your back leg. Right here, nose over the toe of your front leg. Just reach for your toe with this hand, okay, so that we already are shifted over this leg. And I want you to really bring your chest up, bringing this knee up right here. Hold for just a second so that we lock this hip out and slowly back down with that reach. That reach is just going to facilitate a nice hip shift. Go ahead, engage all the way up. Go for that nice hip shift. Try to breathe in on the way down. Engage through the floor. Breathing out. Bringing that leg up. Okay, so we'll switch to the other side. Again, reciprocation, alternation. It is the aim of the game. Right here, get that nice little hand reach. Nose over toe. Breathe in. Engage through the floor. Breathing out. Go for that arm, nice reach for the floor, breathing in, because we're shifting over this leg. Engage. Try to bring that knee up nice as high as possible. Nicely, slowly to the floor, breathing in. You should feel a hip stretch right now. Engage. High as you can. To a nice hip activation. Last one, breathing in. Breathe out. Good. So there you go. Three brief examples of how we can, first of all, get our hips shifting in a stretch position, in a more regressed, something easier to do. And something that maybe we can do is the first thing we can do. To then a little bit more of a functional stretch in a standing position, which allows us to use our core, use some of our leg muscles to work functionally, holding us up against gravity, while still getting a nice little hip stretch, reciprocating, alternating. And then that last one was getting that nice hip activation, reciprocating, alternating, with the whole hip shift spectrum, so that you're really getting through those movements. As you notice, a lot of it's just sort of one side to the other walking pattern. Yeah, that's because that's what we are as human beings. We just get stuck to one side. And although we think we can walk fine, we think we can run fine, we don't reciprocate and alternate well enough to get us out of these patterns. And that's the aim of the game, is just to unwind and get us a little bit more of a balanced flow. And then our body will actually figure things out a lot better than we realize. However, we do still want to go into the final aspect of our warm-up, which would be the integration, movement to core component. And once you're done with this, we're free to lift our heavy weights. We're free to go to our, strongest set of whatever it is, be it deadlift or arms or whatever. This is where you would do your core exercises. Okay, this is the part where you want to you've kind of activated your core, so now you want to, I would say, further the activation, maybe put a little bit of strength factor into it, but be in mind that core never stops working. And so as you do your strength, you're still working your core. So this is not a time to necessarily overly blast your core. My recommendation is 3 exercises, go 2 times through. Or if you really want to push yourself, 3 exercises, go 3 times through. But 3 different exercises of varying positions, varying movements, varying angles are usually good enough to kind of really challenge this midsection. Again, balance it out, left and right, and get a good awareness of it. Break it down a little bit, But then as you go into your strength pattern movements, whether it's a leg day, upper body day, or even if you're just looking for some burnout, a burnout workout, you're now activated enough and aware enough here and hopefully engaging throughout your whole workout, okay? So when I think of core, I'm gonna pick 3 exercises based on concepts that I think just take it with a grain of salt, and after this you can add whatever you want, but this is what I tend to like to do, okay? I like to just break it down into sort of some integrative patterns. Lateral plane, working your lateral side to side plane, so I'll go into my hip bridge pattern because that's really good for integrating hip to core, reciprocating it. For front to back, I like to go into my bear crawl. Such a good reciprocating, alternating movement pattern that gets our back off, core and fully engaged. Good mechanics with the hips. And then lastly would be a chop pattern, which again, if you got in this staggered position, now we're really teaching us to rotate into our stance. So that being said, let me kind of demonstrate these 3 exercises, but you know, you can pick whatever you want. I just like to break it down into these 3 sort of movement planes, although they're not foolproof. The movement planes are very, very integrative, and it doesn't really work just as simply as that, as working front to back, side to side, and rotation. However, it is nice to break core down into these 3 sort of principal factors and being really aware of it, making sure you can handle it, making sure your left hip is just as good as your right shoulder, and your right hip is just as good as your left shoulder, because they tend to work together a lot. So let me show you the first one. This one is a classic. I do it all the time. I love it. So I'm sorry if you've seen it before, but I just think we should all be masters of this one, the side hip bridge. You're gonna be right here on your forearm. Bend that bottom knee, okay? You're gonna keep this knee and bottom shin on the floor. The top leg, we can start in the beginning to just stack it, but I prefer to just put it slightly behind. And what we're gonna do is pushing this down, engaging, we're gonna breathe out. Bring that knee forward. Slowly back down to the floor. Bring a nice arm, bring your arm forward for a nice arm reach, breathing in. Breathe out. Reach forward, breathing in. Breathe out. Reach forward, breathing in. And breathe out. Making sure we're filtering the air through properly, because that's only going to further facilitate that nice core engagement that we really want, and we're already integrating well with hips in this lateral side to side plane. So go forward on the other side, okay? Arm reach forward, breathing in so that we're getting air in here. Breathe out, engage. Reach forward in, out, engage. And as you can see, although this one I am working same hip, same shoulder, that's why I'm integrating this reach, because I'm still doing some of the same movement patterns that would be happening when I'd be walking, running, which is, this is coming back, you know, as, whatnot. So, and that's why we're also driving that knee forward. I prefer that a lot more than just being stagnant like this and just doing that. Because this, we're bringing all these nice rotational factors into play. Reciprocation, alternation. So that's valuable stuff. Okay, so the next one, like I said, is the bear crawl. This one's more of a front to back core pattern. It's really good for just integrating all of that. Like I just said, you're gonna be right here, back is flat, head is already obviously gonna be in a neutral position because you don't want it hanging down. So that's gonna really teach you some nice head back posture mechanics. You're gonna be on the toes. Raise your knees off the floor, keeping your knees about 2 inches from the floor. That gives us really nice length tension relationship from your quads and your hamstrings. So it puts your quads into a not overly tense state, but not overly stretched. and the hamstrings in a somewhat engaged state, allowing them to work a little bit. And you're in a regressed plane, so now you're in a crawling pattern, working your arms, and it's going to work your nice shoulder stabilizers in a really good way. So usually opposite hand to leg is what we want to do, and we would just do nice and slowly. I have a tutorial on this, of different variations, however you want to do it. One of my favorite though is to take a breath pace, breathe out, breathe in. Take a pace, breathe out, breathe in. Take a pace, breathe out, breathe in. Nice and slow. I've done another variation where you go one limb at a time, where I can go hand, leg, hand, leg, hand, leg, hand, leg. Lots of variations. We can go through tons of, spend all this time going through it. I'm not going to, just because we're keeping it moving. Hopefully you get the idea, but just shoot me a message if you are confused about, you know, where to go with these patterns. But that should hopefully give you some options. So next, or lastly, the final part, so is the chop. So when I said chop, this is pretty much what I entailed with it. There are lots and lots of chop variations. Principally, this is what I want you to think about. So obviously you're going to need a band or a cable or something to chop across. This horizontal rotational map patterns are very important for core. So as I just did in those sideline positional exercise, that's, you know, with the arm reaching, I already mentioned how well, this is really important because we're getting rotational factors. Well, there's no resistance there. So then what we want to do, what we want to make sure we do is add a little bit of horizontal resistance, whether it's a band, cable with some weight, whatever. But we definitely need some of it. So let's just say we're going to do a simple, just horizontal chop across. Let's get this leg forward. As you can see, I'm nice and mutual. This can be of any height. We can go low to high. Actually, I'll go low to high. Or we can go high to low, or even centered straight across. Lots and lots of variations. Okay, ooh. All right. Engage this leg down, so we've got some stance activity, we've got some hamstring, we've got some inner thigh, we've got a glute working on the other side, and then chop with an exhale, obviously, always making sure we engage that core. Breathing in on the reach back. Making sure you engage with the leg down. Okay, simple chop variation. Okay, now we've switched it to the other side. All right, so I get the other half kneeling position. I could be on my feet and being in a slightly staggered position, but I'm going to be much more regressed and make it easy. Everybody should utilize this half kneeling position as much as possible when warming up or even in strength patterns, because as you can see, you're working a nice little hip shift, or at least muscles that are going to facilitate the hip shift. So we're going to do 4 reps right here. Engage the foot into the floor as you exhale and shift. Breathing in the reach back, push down, and breathe out. Pushing down, breathing out. There you go. No right or wrong way. There's many different ways we can do that. But one of the better ways, I would say, is to utilize the half kneeling position. And as you know, as we go through that full rotation, full exhalation, allowing the ribs to drop and pull over that side of the hips, you're going to be helping yourself facilitate nice shifting patterns, integration with reciprocation and alternation, which is why I'm repeating over and over, because that is the name of the game. If you do that in your warm-up, you'll find that you'll put your body into a really good place, ready for an optimal workout, giving yourself the best chance for a workout, taking yourself out of pain, giving yourself the best chance for maximal effort, allowing you to have joy out of your movement, effort out of your movement, focus out of your movement, because you're just more aware of yourself. And it makes working out so much more fun when you're more aware of yourself and have a little bit of idea of these body positions and postures and biomechanics. But a lot of it I've gone over in these exercises. Movement is the best medicine. If you just go through exercises and get into a pattern and get better at them, your body will learn, and you'll see the difference. You'll see the difference when you go for walks, hikes, that kind of stuff. If you're a weekend warrior and play any kind of sport, maybe you'll be like, oh, I'm feeling a lot better when I play, or I recover a lot better. So basically that's pretty much it. Just a quick recap. I said number one, get your breathing down, because breathing affects position. Breathing affects relaxation, which affects position. Number two, if we have any sort of muscle pathology, tension patterns or alignment patterns, sure, we can release those particular muscles to get ourselves some relief, but don't focus on releasing everything. Especially if you've done your breathing right, you might be ready to just go and not have to release anything. Number three would be hip shift activation, acquired through balance, going from one side to the other side, movement patterns. Don't just think of turning on your hip. It has to be a hip shift activation. So how are we facilitating that? And that will require glutes, but it will also require some adductors and hamstrings to get that reciprocated, alternating, shifting pattern going on. So I talked about some 3 exercises that'll get that going. And then lastly, integrating your core with movement. And I did some 3 different movement plane core exercises, challenge the body in different positions to activate different awarenesses of our core. Ultimately, that also coming down to hip position awareness. Reciprocating, alternating patterns. It's just in our DNA. It's what we're designed to do, and so yeah, that's what we gotta warm our body up to do. Anyway, so that's pretty much it. I appreciate everybody who tuned in. I see I do have some questions here. I'm not sure I'll be able to go into all of them. Let me see if there are anything. Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. Yes, so no real questions, I don't see. Just more comments of appreciate. Yes, sir. But yes, email any questions about exercises. Just email my links. Email me, and I can show you the links for the exercises, because I know I talked a lot about these references of YouTube videos that I've done. So if you want a detailed tutorial, just go ahead, send me a message, and I can link you those videos. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Next week I'll go over foam rolling techniques and take it from there. Appreciate you always tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and send me a message if you want me to cover any topics in the future. Bye for now.